I was walking our dog and ran into my husband, holding hands with another woman in the park. It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that makes you forget all your troubles. The sun was warm against my skin. The breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, and our golden retriever Baxter was pulling at his leash with joyful excitement. I'd been feeling down lately, a little disconnected from my husband Derek. He'd been working late, traveling more, and when he was home, he seemed distant. I thought a walk in the park might clear my head. I needed fresh air and the familiar comfort of our routine. I wandered through the familiar paths, watching families play and couples stroll hand in hand. I was lost in my own thoughts, not really paying attention to anything in particular. And then I saw them, Derek, my husband, walking along the path ahead of me. His arm was wrapped around a woman I didn't recognize. They were laughing, leaning into each other, completely absorbed in their own little world. Baxter barked, and Derek turned around. The look on his face when he saw me told me everything I needed to know. Baxter has always been a good dog, loyal, loving, and blessed with an uncanny ability to sense when something is wrong. That afternoon, as we walked through Meadowbrook Park, I remember him stopping suddenly, his ears perking up, his tail wagging with an intensity that seemed almost frantic. I thought he'd spotted a squirrel or another dog. I tugged gently on his leash, urging him forward, but he wouldn't budge. He was staring at something ahead of us, his body tense with anticipation. I followed his gaze, expecting to see a family having a picnic or children playing on the swings. Instead, I saw a couple walking along the path, their arms wrapped around each other. I didn't recognize them. I was about to turn away to redirect Baxter, when something about the man's posture made me pause. The way he walked, the way he tilted his head when he laughed, the familiar curve of his shoulders. I knew that silhouette. I'd seen it 1,000 times across a dinner table, in our bed, walking through the front door after a long day at work. It was Derek. My husband was walking through the park with his arm around another woman. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood frozen on the path, my hand gripping Baxter's leash so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I told myself it wasn't him. I told myself it was just a man who looked like him. A cruel trick of the afternoon light. But then the couple turned slightly, and I saw his face clearly. It was him. There was no mistaking the sharp jawline I'd traced with my fingers 100 times, the smile that had always made my heart flutter. He was laughing at something the woman had said, his head thrown back in that carefree way I'd always loved, and his arm was draped across her shoulders, his fingers playing with the ends of her hair. I don't know how long I stood there. Seconds, maybe minutes. It felt like an eternity. Baxter whined softly, sensing my distress, nudging my hand with his wet nose. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding in front of me. The woman was beautiful, with long dark hair that cascaded down her back and a figure that made me feel suddenly self-conscious in my old yoga pants and oversized sweater. She was wearing a sundress, the kind of dress I used to wear before I became too busy, too tired, too comfortable to bother. She looked young. She looked vibrant. She looked like the woman I used to be. And then Baxter barked. It was a sharp, loud bark that cut through the peaceful afternoon air. Derek turned around, his eyes scanning the path until they landed on me. I watched the color drain from his face. I watched the smile vanish from his lips, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. He froze, his arm still around the woman, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The woman looked at him, then followed his gaze to me. Her expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something that looked almost like guilt. She knew who I was. Of course she knew. He'd probably shown her pictures of me, described me as the crazy wife who didn't understand him. For a long moment, no one moved. The world around us seemed to fade away. The laughing children, the chirping birds, the distant sound of traffic. It was just the three of us, frozen in a moment that would change everything. I thought about running, thought about screaming. I thought about walking up to them and slapping the woman or Derek or both, but I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, and waited for him to speak. "Eleanor," he finally managed, his voice cracking. "I can explain," I laughed. It was a hollow, bitter sound that didn't sound like me at all. "Can you?" I asked, "because it looks to me like you're explaining yourself pretty clearly right now." The woman took a step back, her hands raised as if to ward off an attack. "I didn't know," she said quickly. "He told me he was divorced. He said he was single. I wouldn't have—" "Save it," I cut her off. "I don't care what he told you. I don't care what you thought. The fact is, you're walking through my park with my husband, and I'm standing here like an idiot with our dog." Baxter, bless his loyal heart, started growling at Derek. It was a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. He'd always been protective of me, but I'd never seen him act like this. He was guarding me, defending me, taking sides in a war he didn't understand. Derek took a step toward me, his hands outstretched. "Please, Eleanor, just let me explain. It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're holding hands with another woman in the park. You're laughing with her, touching her hair, looking at her like she's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. What exactly am I supposed to think?" The woman, whoever she was, started backing away slowly, her eyes darting between us like she was looking for an escape route. I didn't blame her. I wanted to escape too. I wanted to wake up from this nightmare and find myself in my bed, with Derek beside me, the whole thing just a terrible dream. Who is she? I demanded. How long has this been going on? Derek opened his mouth to answer, but the woman spoke first. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I really didn't know. He told me he was divorced. He told me there was no one else. I would never, just go, I said, my voice flat. Just get out of here. I need to talk to my husband. She looked at Derek, waiting for some kind of direction. He nodded weakly, and she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement. I watched her go. This woman who had been living in my life without my knowledge, this stranger who had touched my husband's skin and made him laugh and looked at him with love in her eyes. When she was out of sight, I turned back to Derek. Well, I said, you wanted to explain, so explain. Derek looked at me with pleading eyes, the same eyes I'd fallen in love with a decade ago. But all I saw now was a stranger, a man who had deceived me so completely that I didn't recognize him anymore. He reached for my hand and I pulled away sharply. Baxter growled again, positioning himself between us. The dog was smarter than I was. He'd known something was wrong long before I had. Her name is Jasmine, Derek began, his voice barely above a whisper. We met at a work conference 8 months ago. It wasn't supposed to happen. It just did. 8 months? I repeated, the words tasting like acid in my mouth. You've been seeing her for 8 months? Not seeing her, he said quickly. It was just, we connected. I didn't plan it. It just happened. I laughed again. That same hollow, bitter sound. It just happened? People don't just accidentally fall into affairs. People don't just accidentally meet someone and start holding hands in parks. You made choices, Derek. You chose to lie to me. You chose to hide this from me. You chose her. He hung his head, unable to meet my gaze. I'm sorry, he said. I never wanted to hurt you. Never wanted to hurt you? I felt a surge of anger that made my hands shake. You've been lying to me for 8 months. You've been coming home late, canceling plans, looking at me like I was a stranger. And you never wanted to hurt me? You did worse than hurt me. You made me feel like I was losing my mind. You made me question everything I thought I knew about us. I thought about all the nights I'd waited up for him, the dinners I'd made that sat untouched, the times I'd asked if everything was okay and he'd told me I was being paranoid. I thought about the way he'd pulled away from me in bed, the way he'd stopped calling me pet names, the way he'd become a ghost in his own life. I'd blamed myself. I'd thought I wasn't pretty enough, interesting enough, good enough. And all along, he'd been giving his best self to another woman. How long were you going to keep this from me? I asked. Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you just going to keep sneaking around behind my back until one of us died? Derek didn't answer. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on the ground, looking more like a scolded child than the man I'd married. It made me angrier. I wanted him to fight back. I wanted him to show some passion, some emotion. His silence was worse than any argument. Who is she really? I pressed. What's her story? Is she married? Does she have kids? Does she know she's sleeping with a married man? She knows now, he said quietly. Thanks to me, I shot back. Thanks to Baxter and his stupid barking? You didn't even have the decency to tell her about me. You let her walk around thinking she was your girlfriend while I was at home thinking you were my husband. I started walking, not really knowing where I was going. I just needed to move, to put distance between us, to stop seeing his face and hearing his excuses. Baxter trotted beside me, his tail drooping, his brown eyes filled with concern. Derek followed, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path behind me. Please, Eleanor, he called out. Please just talk to me. Let me explain properly. What else is there to explain? I asked, not turning around. You had an affair. You lied to me. You lied to her. You made a fool out of both of us. What else could you possibly say? Something happened at work, he said, his voice strained. Jasmine came into my department and we started talking. She was going through a divorce and I listened. I know that sounds like an excuse. I know it doesn't make it okay, but I was lonely, Eleanor. You were so busy with your job, with your friends, with everything else. You didn't have time for me anymore. I stopped walking and turned to face him. Don't you dare blame this on me, I said, my voice dangerously low. I was busy because I was trying to build a life for us. I was working overtime so we could afford that vacation you wanted. I was taking care of everything at home so you could focus on your career. I was trying to be a good wife, and you repaid me by cheating. I know, he said, his voice breaking. I know I made a terrible mistake. I know I betrayed you. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you if you'll just give me a chance. A chance? I laughed bitterly. You don't deserve a chance. You don't deserve anything. You had a chance. You had years of chances, and you threw them all away for a woman in a sundress who doesn't even know your middle name. I pulled out my phone and started walking again, my fingers flying across the screen. I called my best friend Vanessa. She answered on the second ring. Eleanor, she said, her voice filled with concern. Are you okay? You sound weird. I'm not okay, I said, my voice shaking. I just caught Derek cheating on me. In the park? With some woman. I need you to come get me. I need to get out of here. Vanessa was silent for a moment. Then she said, I'm on my way. Where are you? I gave her the address and hung up, ignoring Derek's pleas behind me. I sat down on a nearby bench and buried my face in my hands. Baxter climbed onto my lap, his heavy body warm and comforting. I buried my face in his fur and let the tears come. I cried for the life I thought I had. I cried for the future I'd imagined. I cried for the man I'd loved who had turned out to be a stranger. Derek sat down on the bench beside me, keeping a careful distance. He didn't try to touch me. He just sat there waiting, like he had all the time in the world. But I had no more time for him. Vanessa arrived within 20 minutes. She found me on the bench, my eyes red and swollen, Baxter still sprawled across my lap. Derek was still sitting beside me, a silent shadow in the dying afternoon light. Vanessa walked up to him without hesitation and said, "You need to leave, now." He started to protest, but she cut him off with a look that could have curdled milk. I said, "Leave. You've done enough damage for one day." Derek looked at me, waiting for some sign of forgiveness, some crack in my armor. I didn't give him one. I stared straight ahead, my eyes fixed on the distant trees, refusing to acknowledge his presence. Finally, he stood up and walked away, his footsteps slow and heavy, as if he was carrying the weight of everything he'd destroyed. Vanessa sat down beside me and wrapped her arm around my shoulders. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "I'm so sorry. What am I going to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We have a life together. A house, a dog, years of memories. How do I just throw all of that away?" "You don't," she said. "You don't throw it away." He did. He threw it away the moment he chose to be with her. "You just get to pick up the pieces." I nodded slowly, her words sinking in. She was right. I hadn't destroyed our marriage. He had. And now it was up to me to decide what came next. Over the next few days, I moved out of our house and into Vanessa's spare room. I couldn't bear to be in that space anymore. The bed where he'd slept, the kitchen where we'd cooked, the living room where we'd built our lives. Every corner held memories I wasn't ready to face. Baxter came with me. He was the only thing I took that truly mattered. Derek called constantly. He left voicemails, sent texts, even showed up at Vanessa's door one night. I refused to see him. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. He'd broken something fundamental, something that couldn't be fixed with apologies and promises. I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia. She laid out my options and assured me that I would come out of this with everything I deserved. I filed for divorce. The papers were served to Derek while he was at work. He called me, screaming, begging, bargaining. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail and deleted it without listening. The affair became public knowledge. Our friends, our families, our neighbors, everyone knew what he'd done. Jasmine, the woman in the park, reached out to me through a mutual acquaintance. She wanted to apologize, to explain that she'd been lied to as much as I had. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear anything from anyone who had touched my husband. Months passed. The divorce was finalized, and I got the house, the dog, and a settlement that would allow me to start over. Derek moved into a small apartment across town. I heard through the grapevine that Jasmine had broken up with him as soon as the scandal broke. She didn't want to be associated with a liar. She didn't want to be the other woman. I found that ironic. She hadn't cared when she was the other woman. She only cared when people found out. I started therapy. I needed to process the betrayal, to understand how I'd missed the signs, to forgive myself for trusting him when I should have doubted. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I was drowning, days when I couldn't get out of bed, days when I wondered if I'd ever feel like myself again. But slowly, painstakingly, I started to heal. I took up painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned years ago. I started going for walks with Baxter every evening, not to escape my thoughts, but to process them. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected and made new ones. I discovered that I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. I discovered that losing Derek wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of someone new. A year later, I ran into Derek at a coffee shop. He looked older, tired, a shadow of the man I'd married. He asked if we could talk, and I agreed. We sat down at a small table, and he apologized again, this time without excuses. He told me that he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. He told me that he missed me, missed us. He told me that he'd never stopped loving me. I listened quietly, and then I said, "I don't love you anymore, Derek. I don't hate you either. I just don't care." And that's the worst thing of all, isn't it? Not that I'm angry, not that I'm sad, but that I've moved on. He looked crushed, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it passed quickly. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to punish him. I just wanted to live my life without him. That's the thing about betrayal. It hurts like hell, but it also sets you free. Walking away from Derek was the hardest thing I've ever done. For the first few months, I second-guessed myself constantly. Was I being too harsh? Should I have given him another chance? But with time came clarity. He'd lied to me for months. He'd made a fool of me. He'd treated me like I was nothing while giving everything to someone else. And when I confronted him, he'd blamed me. That told me everything I needed to know about his character. The revenge I took wasn't dramatic or public. It was quiet and personal. I took back my life. I reclaimed my identity. I stopped being his wife and started being myself again. I traveled, I painted, I laughed. I found joy in the small things and gratitude in every moment. And when I finally felt ready, I started dating again. Baxter, my loyal companion, is still by my side. He doesn't understand what happened, and that's okay. He just loves me, unconditionally and without judgment. He's taught me more about loyalty than Derek ever did. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust another person the way I trusted Derek, but I'm learning to trust myself. I'm learning to listen to my gut, to pay attention to the signs I missed before. I'm learning that love isn't about giving someone your whole heart and hoping they don't break it. It's about knowing that even if they do, you'll survive. Some people say that forgiveness is the key to healing. Maybe they're right. But I think the real key is acceptance. Accepting that the past can't be changed, that people are flawed, that love doesn't always work out the way you hope. Once you accept those things, you can let go. And once you let go, you can move forward. I'm not bitter anymore. I don't carry anger in my heart. I carry gratitude. For the good years, for the lessons, for the strength I didn't know I had. The woman who walked through the park with her dog that Sunday afternoon is gone. In her place is someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid to walk alone.